I'm Evan. I'm 40, a trauma surgeon. And 2 months ago, I flatlined for exactly 43 seconds, right there in the ICU, while my 10-year-old daughter screamed, "Daddy, please don't die!" And my father? My father was in the hallway, waiting, with a folder of documents in one hand and a cold expression that didn't change when the code blue alarms went off. That's when I knew he'd cut me off. Financially, emotionally, permanently. They always said I was the strong one. Not smart, like my older brother Matthew with his MBA and vineyard wedding. Not artistic, like my younger sister Bella who turned crying on cue into a career in indie films. Just strong. I was the one who held Mom's hand through chemo. I was the one who stayed up with Bella's kid when she ran off to a healing retreat in Big Sur. I was the one who didn't ask for much because I was too busy saving people who weren't family. My father, Richard, ex-military, successful hardware store chain owner, always respected strength. At least I thought he did. That was until the accident. It was a 3-car pileup. I was in the middle vehicle. Wrong place, wrong time. 2 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and an emergency thoracotomy to stop the internal bleeding. They had to sedate me for 3 days. On the 2nd day, my daughter, Lily, refused to leave the hospital. She curled up in the stiff armchair next to my bed and whispered stories into my unconscious ear. Stuff about our cat, Mr. Pickles, and how she didn't like her new math teacher because he said the word hypotenuse too many times. She held my hand the entire time. But my father? He didn't show up until I was conscious again. When I opened my eyes, he was sitting in the corner, legs crossed, tablet in hand. "Good," he said. "You're awake. We need to talk about your finances." "Not, I'm glad you're alive." "Not even. Lily's been so brave. Just straight into numbers." And then the bomb dropped. "I'm pulling the plug on your trust." I blinked. Thought maybe I was still hallucinating. "My trust?" "The medical leave," he said. "The months off, the bills stacking up. Evan, you can't afford your house without me. And you know I don't fund recklessness." "I was in a car accident," I croaked. He didn't blink. "You were driving home from a shift after 36 hours awake. That's a choice." I stared at him. The man who used to coach my Little League games. The man who held me upright the day Mom died. Then I looked at Lily. She had just come back from the vending machine. She was holding a chocolate bar and a Sprite. Her eyes darted between us like she'd walked into a bad play at intermission. "Grandpa?" she asked. He didn't answer. He stood, brushed imaginary lint off his pants, and said, "It's time you learned to stand on your own. Strength, Evan. It's about more than showing up. It's about being prepared." And then he walked out of the hospital room. Not a hug. Not a glance at his granddaughter. Just walked out. I couldn't even sit up fully, but I swear my chest hurt more from that than from the broken bones. Because when you spend your whole life being strong for everyone else, you start to believe that one day, someone might be strong for you. But apparently not. Not in my family. Not in his world. And definitely not when you're dying on a hospital bed and your daughter is begging you not to go. 3 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital, my landlord posted an eviction notice on my front door. I stood there in my robe, clutching a cup of reheated broth, staring at the paper like it was written in some alien dialect. My brain wasn't all the way back online, but I could still piece together the words, payment default, and final warning. And I knew exactly who to call. "Dad," I said when he picked up, "there's an eviction notice on my door. I thought the mortgage was being covered through the trust?" His reply was surgical. "I closed the account." "You'll need to find other arrangements." Other arrangements? Like this was a flight delay, not the roof over his granddaughter's head. "Are you serious right now?" I whispered, trying not to wake Lily, who was finally sleeping after 3 weeks of panic attacks and midnight sobbing. "You knew I'd be down for at least 6 weeks. I knew you'd find a way if you really had to," he said. "You've always been the resourceful one." He said it like it was a compliment. Like this wasn't a premeditated abandonment disguised as character development. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, shaking, until the screen went black. By noon, I'd called the hospital's HR, 3 old colleagues, and my insurance caseworker. By 5, I'd found a social worker who said the words, "We might have something, but it's not permanent." And by nightfall, I'd packed our essentials into 3 boxes, left a note for the landlord, and carried Lily, still asleep, to the car. That's how I ended up in a 2-bedroom transitional housing unit designed for low-income families recovering from medical trauma. It was clean, quiet, and cold. The heater groaned like it was being punished. The neighbor's toddler cried all night through paper-thin walls. But we had a place to sleep, and no one was pointing to the door. The next morning, I tried to explain to Lily what was happening. She was eating dry cereal on the floor. "This is just for a little while," I said. "Until Daddy's strong enough to go back to work." She nodded too fast. "Will Grandpa help now?" My throat tightened. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Grandpa's not going to help anymore." She didn't ask why. That's the part that gutted me. She already knew. 2 weeks later, I was cleared for light desk work. I started back at the hospital, reviewing case files, consulting on procedures, anything that kept my brain busy and the lights on. I reached out to my dad once more. This time in writing. The email was short. "Dad, I need to know. Was this about punishment, or about control? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you left your son for dead, and took his daughter down with him. Evan." No reply. Instead, a week later, I got a package in the mail. It was Lily's college fund ledger. He'd closed it, too. The envelope was fat with finality. And that's when something broke open in me. This wasn't a lesson. This was war. And not the loud, fiery kind with yelling and slammed doors. No, my father never yelled. He weaponized silence. Precision. Pressure. So I fought back the only way I knew how, like a surgeon. I opened a new savings account in Lily's name. I cashed out what was left of my retirement plan, picked up extra consult hours, and started rebuilding, one ridiculous shift at a time. Lily started drawing again. I started sleeping again, barely. And every time I felt like collapsing, I remembered that ICU room. Her little voice begging, "Please don't die." That wasn't a cry for help. That was a contract. And I was damn well going to honor it. The first time I saw my father again after the hospital, I was wearing a surgical mask and he was wearing a suit that looked like it had never been wrinkled by love or emergency. We were at a charity gala for the hospital's trauma wing. I was invited as a speaker. My story had made the rounds, the surgeon who almost didn't make it. Donors loved that kind of thing. Resilience, comeback, blah blah blah. My father was there as one of the legacy donors. He wasn't listed on the board anymore, but his name still echoed in the room like furniture no one wanted to move. When I stepped off the stage, I saw him at the bar. He didn't approach me. He approached the man standing next to me, my department chief. "Dr. Patel," my father said, smiling with all his teeth and none of his eyes. "Always a pleasure. Fine work you're doing with the trauma unit. Evan's always spoken highly of you." I didn't say a word. Dr. Patel looked from him to me, visibly confused. "I thought you weren't speaking?" "I'm not," I said. My father's smile didn't waver. "Some things are bigger than personal disagreements." I stared at him. "Is that what this is? A disagreement?" He leaned in slightly. "You made your choices, Evan. I made mine." Then he looked at my department chief again. "Just know that if you're ever looking for capital for expansion, the family foundation is still open for business." And that's when I lost it. Not loudly. I didn't throw anything. I didn't cause a scene. I just reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to him. It was a printout of the financial hardship form I'd submitted to the hospital's employee assistance program. The one that helped cover part of Lily's therapy when insurance denied it as non-essential. He unfolded it. Read the first few lines. Then looked up. "This is real," I said. "That's what it is. Real. You cut me off while I was dying. While your granddaughter was sobbing into my chest begging me to live. And then you had the gall to show up here and use my name to open doors." His face changed, not a full collapse, just a crack at the edge of the mask. "I didn't cut you off out of cruelty," he said. "I did it because you needed to learn to survive without a net." "I didn't need a net," I said. "I needed a father." That shut him up. The air between us thickened, like the moment before a storm breaks. Dr. Patel cleared his throat and muttered something about checking on the raffle. It was just us now. "Do you know what it did to her?" I said. "Lily. Watching me disappear into machines while you sat outside with a manila envelope. You think I'll ever forget that? You think she will?" My father looked at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. Maybe I always had been. "You've always been so sentimental," he said finally. "It clouds your judgment." And there it was. The judgment. The disgust. The deep, bone-level disappointment that I'd somehow failed his blueprint. I folded the paper back up and slid it into my coat. "We're done," I said. "Not because you cut me off, but because I finally realized what you really were all along." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "A ghost with a bank account." I walked out of that gala without shaking another hand. The air outside was cold, but it felt like oxygen again. When I got home, Lily was asleep with a comic book draped across her chest. Her tiny chest rising and falling like she'd finally exhaled for the first time in weeks. I kissed her forehead. And whispered, "He doesn't get to write our story anymore. Because this was our second beginning." And this time, I was the one holding the pen. I found the photo 2 days later, buried in a shoebox under old tax documents and a half-broken flashlight. It was from when I was 7. My dad had just built a treehouse in our backyard, all nails and plywood and military precision, and in the picture, I was hanging from the side like a monkey, grinning. He was in the background, arms crossed, squinting at the structure like it was a deployment strategy. The caption, in my mom's looping script, said, "Built by Dad. Conquered by Evan." I sat on the floor for a long time, just staring at that photo. It wasn't nostalgia. It was grief. Because I realized something no one tells you as a kid: just because someone builds the treehouse, doesn't mean they know how to live inside it with you. That same week, Lily had her school's family day. I forgot about it. Not forgot as in, I never knew. Forgot as in, the reminder was in my inbox, marked unread, under 30 patient charts, for billing disputes, and an email from the utility company that started with, "Final notice." She didn't say anything when I picked her up late. Just sat in the back seat, her backpack on her lap like a life preserver. "How was family day?" I asked, hoping I already knew the answer. She shrugged. "Mrs. DaCosta said I could sit with her daughter's grandma. We made bracelets." Silence. "I made one for you." She handed it to me, lumpy, rainbow, with the word, "Stay," spelled out in crooked plastic letters. I almost had to pull over. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time since the hospital. Not just cried. Heaved. Because I'd been holding my breath for so long, I didn't even know I was suffocating. I was surviving, but not living. Functioning, but not present. And that wasn't the life Lily deserved. The next morning, I put on the bracelet. I wore it to the hospital. I wore it during consults and chart reviews. I wore it when I spoke to finance about negotiating a debt forgiveness plan. And I wore it when I stood in line at the credit union, opening a small business account under the name Stay Medical Advocacy. Because I'd decided. If my father was going to treat support like a prize for obedience, then I was going to become the man who never made a child feel like love had a price tag. I started consulting for patient families, walking them through insurance red tape, advocating for post-discharge coverage, helping them understand what out-of-network really meant when your child was on a ventilator. Word spread fast. Doctors referred me. Nurses passed around my number. Within a month, I had 10 families on my roster and a wait list of 7 more. Every time I sat across from a scared parent with a folder of denial letters and unpaid bills, I thought of Lily. And I thought of my father. Because in some twisted way, he taught me this. He taught me what never to be. One night, as I was walking out of the transitional housing center, the director stopped me. Evan, she said. There's a woman here asking for you. Says she's family. My stomach dropped. I stepped into the small waiting room, half expecting to see my father. But it wasn't him. It was my sister, Julia. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. She was sitting with her coat clutched around her like armor, eyes rimmed red, face thinner than I remembered. Hey, she said, standing up slowly. I didn't know where else to go. I crossed my arms. You didn't think to call before showing up at a housing shelter where my daughter lives? I didn't think you'd answer, she said quietly. Fair. She took a breath. Dad's dying. The words hung there like wet laundry. What? Pancreatic cancer, she said. Stage 4. They found it late. He didn't tell anyone for months. Just started fading. I stared at her. He wants to see you, she added. Said it might be his only chance to. No. She blinked. Evan, he's your father. He's the man who left us homeless. I snapped. The man who closed Lily's college fund while I was still hooked to machines. I know, she said. Believe me, I know. He's done terrible things. But this might be the only shot at peace you'll ever get. Peace. That word again. Like it was a door you could just choose to walk through. I looked at her, my sister who'd vanished from my life after taking his side over and over again. And for a second I saw the girl I used to protect. The one who cried when her goldfish died and held my hand on the first day of middle school. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. That night, Lily curled up next to me on the couch. Can we stay here forever? She asked. I didn't have an answer. Because I had just been handed a choice that might rip open every scar I'd stitched shut. To face the man who broke me. Or let him die thinking he was right. The hospice smelled like antiseptic and orange peel. Someone had tried to make it feel less like dying and more like waiting, but there's only so much you can do with dim lights and a view of the parking lot. My father was smaller than I remembered. His shoulders looked like deflated tents beneath a thin hospital blanket. The man who once built a house with his hands couldn't even lift his cup of water. His eyes opened when he heard the door, slow, deliberate. Evan, he rasped, voice like sandpaper dragged across wood. You came. I didn't move closer. Julia said you were asking for me. He nodded, breathing shallow. Didn't think you would. I almost didn't, I said. He smiled, not the confident boardroom grin I grew up with. Something softer, cracked open from the inside. You were always stubborn. That's one word for it. He coughed, a wet, painful sound that shook the room. I handed him a tissue before I could stop myself. Old habits. You spend your whole life needing someone's approval, and then one reflex betrays you. I heard about your advocacy program, he said after catching his breath. Helping families. That's good work. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. You mean the kind of families you used to tell me weren't my problem? He looked at me then, really looked, and for once, I didn't see command in his eyes. I saw regret. I thought I was preparing you, he said. Teaching you not to depend on anyone. You weren't preparing me, I said quietly. You were making sure I never learned how to ask for help. He blinked hard, chest trembling. You hate me. I thought about that for a long moment. I did, I admitted. But hate's too heavy to carry forever. I put it down when Lily asked why her grandpa didn't visit. Something inside him broke at that. His lips trembled, and a single tear cut through the papery skin on his cheek. I was wrong, he said. All of it. The money, the silence, the tests I called lessons. I was just scared. Of what? Of ending up like my father, needing my son. The words hit like a dull blade. Because that's what this was. Fear. Not pride. Not malice. Fear of weakness passed down like inheritance. He swallowed hard. You became everything I wanted to be. Strong. Steady. Respected. And I lost you because I couldn't admit I already was proud. The room hummed with the sound of the oxygen machine. Outside, a nurse's laughter echoed faintly. Life continuing in the next hallway. I walked to the bedside and sat. For the first time in years, I didn't see the general or the businessman. I saw an old man dying with nothing left to defend. "You hurt me," I said. "You hurt Lily. You broke something that doesn't just fix itself. But I'm here because I don't want to carry that hurt anymore." He reached for my hand. His fingers were bones wrapped in parchment. "You're a better father than I ever was," he whispered. "Tell her. I'm sorry." "I will," I said. And I meant it. He nodded once, small, grateful. Then he drifted, half asleep, half gone, and I sat there, listening to his breathing slow, until the machine went from rhythm to silence. When I walked out, Julia was in the hall, tears streaked down her face. She tried to speak, but I just pulled her into a hug. We stayed like that, two grown children who'd finally run out of anger. 3 weeks later, the funeral was small. Closed casket. No speeches. I didn't talk about forgiveness. I talked about legacy. About how strength without empathy becomes cruelty. About how I refused to inherit that version of manhood. After everyone left, Lily stood by the grave, clutching my hand. "Was he sorry?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "He was." She nodded. "Then we can go home." We did. At home, I opened my father's old briefcase, the one Julia gave me after the service. Inside was a single envelope addressed to me. No money. Just a folded photo. The treehouse. Me grinning, him watching. And on the back, in shaky handwriting. "Built by me. Conquered by you. That's how it should have been." I sat there a long time, the bracelet still on my wrist, "Stay," spelled out in fading beads, and for the first time since that hospital bed, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Because love, I realized, isn't about who saves you. It's about who stays. And my daughter stayed. And I stayed. And that was enough.